Feeling thirsty for knowledge? Hackers on the Rocks is the podcast that mixes refreshing conversation with potent cybersecurity insights. Serving up these insights with a twist, we pair a different software vulnerability with a refreshing cocktail recipe each episode. All right, hello world and greetings all around. Our opening segment is called Get Handle Information, and here to bring you today's drink, our guest, the wonderful Katie Moussouris. Katie, what are we drinking today?
We are drinking organic super green with fruits and vegetables. So, I don't know. You've got yours. I've got my single serving packets over here.
Yep, I have the same brand and the same flavor, so I will partake as well. And while I'm trying to figure out how to open this thing, um, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got in the security community, and I'll be with you in a second once I can figure out how to open this thing.
Sure. Well, I, I'm Katie and I've been in the security community since probably the late 80s, early 90s. I started out in Boston, dialing into a bulletin board system that happened to also be occupied by members of the Cult of the Dead Cow and the Loft, early hacker scene. Um, and we couldn't make a living back then. So my villain or hero arc, whichever, sort of took a turn into biochemistry, molecular biology, worked on the Human Genome Project. And I just remember walking in one day to the Genome Center at MIT, and a teardrop attack had blue screened all of the Windows machines. And I was like, huh, well, friends, this is an exciting turn. So I started focusing more on cybersecurity, right around the turn of the millennium, I would say, like a little bit before that. But um, and became a professional pen tester. I was one of the artists formerly known as AppStake, which was the company that was founded by the Loft and did a lot of pioneering in application security. And then we were acquired by Symantec, and I started Symantec Vulnerability Research, which was kinda like Google Project Zero, but, like, in 2004, right? So 21 years ago, and we just wanted to publish our vulnerability findings and coordinate the release of them if possible, if vendors were interested, which leads me to the company that I founded 9 years ago, Luta Security. Um, Luta helps people create vulnerability disclosure programs and bug bounty programs, and, we work with government companies, and we essentially assess their maturity of their ability to handle the truth. And we work with them to, bring their level of maturity up, and sometimes we even run their programs for them. So the reason I drink this though isn't it this all has to do with each other. Sometimes I'm on the road and sometimes I'm like single purpose occupied, and I swear I'm like a pirate trying not to get scurvy. This is like my reassurance every single day that I'm gonna get some fruits and vegetables. So that is why I drink this every day.
Yeah, it's the Road Warriors go-to. I dig it. I'll tell you, it doesn't come through in a podcast, but this stuff smells terrible. So, uh, all right. I normally our guest will be like, "Oh, here's some bourbon or tequila." I'm like, "That stuff smells terrible." This smells terrible.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, you're gonna you know what? Your liver and your vital organs are gonna thank me. Your palate is not, and I'm sorry about that. It's also gritty. So if you're a texture person, so sorry.
I can do gritty. It's cool. We're good. I'm now stirring the grit into something that is. Oh man, this is our first one of our first visual episodes. Maybe our last. I don't know.
Look, it's clear as mud, and it's gonna help you get through the day. You're gonna feel good today. I'm just telling you right now. If you manage to get that down, you're gonna feel good.
Fair. Well, okay, that's a big test, but let's go with it. All right, so I'll give the obligatory cheers and yeah.
Cheers.
Um, real quick, since I never let anyone off the hook on stuff. So you mentioned a teardrop attack, and oh man, does that take me back to some of those hacking exposed textbooks. But for our audience that may not be familiar with the term teardrop, do you mind giving a couple words on that?
Yeah, from what I recall, that thing was, it was basically like you'd send like a deadly packet, and you could take down a lot of machines, right? So effectively, and it was nicknamed teardrop. A lot of people who are younger think that Heartbleed was the first, named vulnerability, but no, we had names for things. We had names for things. But yeah, that one was a bad packet, basically.
Fair enough. Awesome. Well,
And you could, and you blue screen Windows machines with it. So there you go.
as one does. Excellent. All right. This tastes delicious. So I now have two reasons to thank you today. And I will carry this to all my future conferences. I too am a road warrior from time to time. Um, I also noticed too the actual ingredients say specifically mix with ice, and I don't think you have ice in yours. So we're already breaking rules. Is that how this is gonna go?
Yeah, because normally, I don't carry ice with me on the road. I know it's attainable, acquirable on the road, but I just usually take this with some of my vitamins and everything. So ice drinks are not really chugging drinks. Sometimes I chug this.
All right, I like it. Today's episode is sponsored by Personum. Generating and collecting network traffic is easy. In many regulated industries, it's required. But what are you doing with that stored data? Personum.ai offers a detection as code engine that allows you to sift through your network data looking for behavioral abnormalities. Build and even monetize threat detection solutions from data you are already collecting with Personum. Find out more at personum.ai. All right, we move on to our main segment, which we call the distillery. I recently had the opportunity to talk to you, Katie. Actually, really hear you present at the International Pall Mall Process Consortium, and I was just blown away, impressed by your perspective. So I asked you here today, and thankfully you said yes. Normally, for our dozens, maybe 2 dozens of listeners, we have a CWE, and we talk about the research and the impact of that particular bug. um, I don't know how we're gonna necessarily fold that into today's talk, but maybe more broadly, we can talk a little bit about the evolution of the vulnerability research communities, maybe professional maturity. You mentioned earlier in the show that you at Luta do VDP and bug bounties, so maybe we can discuss what those are and how they're different. And I think just more generically, I think you've said some really spicy comments on social media recently, and I would just love the opportunity to maybe hear more about what's going on in your brain. So, is this all fair game for today? You think?
Absolutely. Yeah. Wherever you want to start.
Yeah. All right. Well, then let's start with Paul Mall. I think one of the things that you had said, I guess, or maybe let me pose this as a question. So, um, in your opinion, from your expertise and studies, can you comment a little bit on the supply of the vulnerability research community, and if you see that number increasing, decreasing, and maybe like why you think whatever those are the way they are? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the vulnerability research community, it consists of human beings, as we know, and their innovations are what fuel both the defensive side of things, where they do vulnerability disclosure and bug bounties, and the offensive side of things, where they sell vulnerabilities to be used in things that the Pall Mall process was talking about. Commercially available spyware, basically, and other hacking tools that are commercially available for offense use. So, specifically, not disclosed to vendors to get them fixed, but instead wanting to use them stealthily for as long as possible to, in a legal way, go after criminals, terrorists, human traffickers, all kinds of bad people, etc. But they can also those available spyware can also be used to target um, journalists, human rights activists, dissidents, and all kinds of, people that you don't really want to bite on in a civilized society. So, um, the humans behind the vulnerability research, behind the exploit development, all of the humans, whether they are doing it for defense purposes, offense purposes, or a little of column A, a little column B, they have a particular set of skills. They have a particular set of skills that they gain over a somewhat finite career. And what by finite, I say that they ramp into these skills and they learn to, be able to defeat the mitigations of the most sophisticated software out there. So your latest iPhone, iOS exploit, um, your latest version of Windows with all of the mitigations applied, etc. So they ramp into the skill set that requires a lot of diligence and different forms of intelligence, almost, being able to outwit the manufacturers of these software, and then they ramp out. And that period of time where they are the most active, their peak activation, is usually about 7 years. And we've kind of seen this over time track. And the research you were referring to was research I had done with MIT Sloan School and Harvard Kennedy School on modeling the vulnerability economy and exploit market. And what we found was we studied the defense side, but you can extrapolate the offense side is operating, with the same constraints. We looked at Microsoft bulletins, right? And the researchers that were submitting what we called bulletin clad vulnerabilities, meaning top of their game, could achieve critical, code execution, remote code execution type of vulnerabilities, and their lifespan of really being able to contribute at that level against the latest version of the software, not the older versions, but the latest, spanned about 7 years. So that is where we get that number. The reason for this are diverse, right? You have operating systems and software moving towards more secure models, so it's a moving target. So that's part of it. But you also have human factors like people wanting more stability in their lives and not having as much time to sort of stay up all night drinking like kale juice or whatever and kale juice and Red Bull cocktails, right? Stay up all night doing vulnerability research and exploit development. So you see life changes contributing to this as well.
Got it. And I mean, to me, when I'm thinking about a 7-year period, maybe I'm thinking less about life changes, although as I get older, they certainly happen. But I'm also thinking too about, and this is, I'm kind of leading the witness here because you mentioned this in your panel, which again, I just thought was just fascinating, was just the concept of you get good at what experience, and that's going to change generation to generation. So from traditionally on our show, we talk about bug classes, right? And so, the early days were server side exploits, right? Just like you said, teardrop, there's a magic packet, and boom. That then shifted to client side, and then we have mobile, then we've got app, and I think for any one human being to be good at all of those things is probably a bridge too far. And so, for the younger generation, they're, sorry to say, kids, but the Aleph One's paper of like you can just smash the stack for fun and profit. Now you have ALSR, which we had an episode on, and ROP gadgets, and that that whole paradigm is a lot trickier than say AI generated code that may have SQL inject bugs. Does that sound like, is that fairly consistent with what your studies found?
Yeah, I mean, we saw that researchers who tended to stay more active for longer periods tended to hop platforms to less sophisticated platforms. So, for example, when servers got more secure, as you were saying, people moved out of the operating system as much and moved into the app layer, where app developers were still lagging behind when a lot of major vendors started tightening up their apps and even their underlying operating systems. You were mentioning ASLR and DEP, and whatnot, all these platform level mitigations. When that started happening, then they'd move to a different platform. So mobile platforms early on were making the same mistake security wise that were very basic. And so researchers could hop from doing, research on Windows to then doing research on, Windows Phone when it still existed, or Apple, the early iOS, et cetera, and early Android, especially, right? Full of bugs and full of the older types of bugs. And then when that platform started getting hardened, people jumped to cars, right? Because cars hadn't gotten their act together yet. So you saw researchers extending their sort of active lifespan by moving to less sophisticated platforms. And we'll probably still see this happening. Honestly, you mentioned AI developed code. Um, AI is training on the code of yours, so we're not going to get more secure code out of AI until AI start like basically correcting itself and building a lexicon of better code to train from.
Yeah, and those, especially like the GPT variants, like those themselves are now being subject to scrutiny that I'm sure the original developers had no intention of. Okay, so then all right, then my premise was incorrect that folks will tend to gravitate towards the lower hanging fruit, right? The easier targets. I guess two questions. The first one, ask you sequentially. So the first question then is, um, I guess as things get harder, what does that do for the barrier of entry for like the next generation that wants to become a security researcher? Are they just is there just too much for them to, drink from that fire hose to find the next thing on, on a server system? Or are they should they just always be encouraged to look at the latest and greatest under the premise that it's just immature, which means they haven't done security at all?
Well, I mean, I think people breaking into the security industry at this point, especially specifically the security research side of things, they still have a lot of low hanging fruit to choose from. Web vulnerabilities are still the most popular on bug bounty platforms, for example. So there's plenty of fruit very close to the ground that can be scooped up, and unfortunately, that I don't see that stopping anytime soon. It's funny when Update started, I was really hopeful. I was naive in that hopefulness, 25 years ago, where I thought, well, they're willing to pay us hackers now to find those vulnerabilities. So if they're paying us, they're certainly going to fix them, right? And it was very naive, thinking that, well, they paid for the work, so why would they not do anything with it? Why would they not want to learn from their mistakes? But we have an entire industry that is basically still content to, leave things to find, for security researchers. So to your point about how could they break into the industry now as security researchers, plenty of low-hanging fruit still. If they want to level up though, and get into that top echelon of hackers, that group that, sort of stays steady worldwide to just a few thousand individuals. And that, because of that moving 7-year window, there's, really just about a few thousand individuals worldwide who are at the top of the game. That I think is still, in a lot of ways, operating with the same way that we all learned to be hackers. You find people who are interested in the specific things that you're interested in. You read as much as you can, find online, and then you reach out to them. And there's still, I think, a direct mentorship that happens with, up leveling the skills to that highest level.
Yeah, I think I forget the exact quote, but it's hackers clump spectacularly together, sometimes even more spectacular, the more spectacular the talent or whatever the phrase is. But I mean, that's been my experience in my time in the industry. Um, I guess you started picking apart my second question before I asked it, which is great. Maybe you can add a little bit further on. But so you have these individuals that are now finding bugs, and let's go through the premise that they found something, low hanging or not. What do they do with them?
Well, they have a choice. Every individual bug presents a choice, and every individual researcher may make different choices depending on the bug itself, right? Um, you know, we all contain multitudes, right? So, I think, you know, researchers, some of them have decided that they only want to work on defense. And so they look for ways to disclose the vulnerability to an organization, and get it fixed. Maybe there's a bug bounty, maybe there's not. Some researchers will only look for bugs where they feel like they might get paid for their time. There's nothing wrong with that. Why would you donate your time and your labor to multi-million dollar corporations for free? I see nothing wrong with seeking, remuneration for your work. And there's some researchers who say, you know what, I have a skill set that is valuable and I want to get top dollar for it. And I'm okay with selling it for offense purposes. And some of them, are particular about who they sell to because they want to know that if it is used for offense, it's not used to abuse human rights. So they have sort of their own code of ethics of who they feel like selling to. And some folks are a little bit more, pragmatic about it in terms of, nope, we're just going to sell it. And then I'm not going to think about how it's used in the future. So all of these are choices. There's also the obvious choice of just dropping 0 day, right? Like, some people these days don't go straight to dropping 0 day. That's less usual than it used to be back in the day, but there's always that option. What you most often see is researchers will not who tend to drop 0 day won't do so unless they've tried to contact a vendor and get it fixed, and they've run up against a brick wall. So those are pretty much the choices. Just flows for defense, try to get it fixed. Um, Full disclosure is still actually in that camp of you're actually disclosing it for defense and trying to get it fixed. You just couldn't get through to the vendor. And then there's private disclosure for offense, and the users that follow.
Yeah, fair. That's a good stopping point where I can now go back to, I think, more thoughts of yours from Paul Mall, where you're setting up this distinction between like an offensive minded researcher and a defensive minded researcher. And it sounds like this, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, please, but like it sounds like the skill set is the same. The motivations may or may not be similar, but the compensation model and incentives can be misaligned. And if they're if the balance is too far off, researchers may tend to gravitate towards one side of that coin versus the other. Can you maybe comment a little bit on those thoughts?
Well, I think for one, not all researchers are strictly in one camp or the other, right? There are plenty of researchers who do both. I know a lot of researchers who will try to sell it in the offense market because it's a higher price. And if there are no buyers, then they'll go ahead and disclose it. Why not? And so I've seen folks operate that way. I've also seen them decide based on the bug, thinking, well, you know what? I would like the planes to stay in the sky, so I'm going to disclose this particular vulnerability to get it fixed because I'd rather not it be used offensively. I'm looking at sort of my own and my family's personal safety on this one, and so even though normally I'd sell I'm not filling this one. I'm gonna try and get it fixed. So researchers themselves will make different choices depending on the bug. But the compensation level, this is an interesting point because a lot of folks say that, well, if you don't offer a bug bounty, somebody else will buy that bug for offense purposes and bad things will happen. That is simply not true. There is not an infinite offense market for every bug that you do not buy on the defense side. There are there are people with enough skills, for example, to find low-hanging fruit. So if you're an organization that has a lot of low-hanging fruit bugs, probably nobody would pay somebody to find those bugs because they're really easy to find with relatively low skills. If somebody wanted to attack you, they could just do so with commercial off-the-shelf, software scanners and find the bugs that they need and go ahead and attack you. So there is not a corresponding one-to-one correlation between offense market and defense market offerings. That being said, those highest value bugs, the ones that are really tough to find, there will be offense buyers and they will be willing to pay multiple millions of dollars for those vulnerabilities as opposed to any bug bounty that may be offered on the defense side, which is much lower compensation. Even the highest bug bounties are still not in direct competition with the offense market. And I think that's a good thing. And a lot of people are really surprised by that. And the reason it is important is that if you think about it, the defense market isn't just about buying the bugs. It's about attracting skilled sets of eyes to look at your product in that way. And where do you want those people where do they contribute the most value? Is it one bug or one exploit chain with, that maybe contains several bugs at a time? Or is it actually working inside your company defensively to prevent those bugs in the first place? And the answer, of course, is working defensively, preventatively. if you make your bug bounties so high that the people with those skill sets would never want to actually take a desk job at your company, you've defeated yourself. You done played yourself. And you may have gotten like one bug from an otherwise offense market seller, or one bug or two or even 10, but you will have cannibalized your hiring pipeline and sacrificed it just to try and outbid the offense market. So the offense market has no such constraints. They just want the bugs that can be used for as long as possible, as stealthily as possible. And they don't need to care about, whether or not you can hire people next year.
Got it. Okay. And so is that the rationale for your earlier comment that, the offensive side will pay a higher price? You just think that it's a deliberate decision by the defensive community or the corporate side to keep prices. I'll say I'm adding words. You can correct me if I'm not characterizing it properly, but keep the bounties artificially low for the purposes of hopefully identifying talent and then making them like a real lucrative job offer. Is that kind of the thought process?
I don't think companies are keeping the bounty prices artificially low. I think they are literally just saying, this is a cash thank you, but, we would like to figure out a way to attract talent to work on the software so that the next version is stronger. If you think about it, bug bounties are just very inefficient one-off, one bug at a time pen test, right? They are in fact, when I was creating Microsoft first bug bounty, I had a folder on my machine that was just called ad hoc pen test, and that was the folder in which I was gathering data about bug reporting inside of Microsoft to help justify, the cost of offering bug bounties. And so, you've heard the phrase before, you can't pen test your way to secure, right? You can't just leave all the bugs on the table and just wait for you to hire somebody to tell you about them. Same thing with bug bounties, the same exact principle. So they're not keeping those prices artificially low. They're just acknowledging, hey, we'd like to give you a cash reward. This is a way for us to focus your effort, higher rewards for things that we find most interesting. So you'll see higher rewards or only rewards on the latest versions in a lot of cases, right? A lot of bug bounty programs will not, they'll take your bug, but if it only affects prior versions of the software, you won't get a bounty for it. That's a very common way to use it as a focus tool, not as a paying you for your time tool, which is totally different.
Got it. And then maybe just for some clarification, because I think it doesn't sound like these are interchangeable terms, but I've heard you say VDP and bug bounty. Are they the same? Are they different? Tell us all.
So, a vulnerability disclosure program, or VDP, is the mechanism by which you can receive vulnerability reports, do something about those reports, investigate them, decide whether you're going to fix it or not, and then release the patch and some kind of communication about that. It is the underlying process that supports a bug bounty program. A bug bounty program is just a VDP with cash rewards at the end. And both of them are the exact same process, just one of them had some sort of cast the word at the end. What's really funny to me is the commercial industry supporting bug bounties and vulnerability disclosure programs, VDPs, has like somewhat brainwashed the industry into saying, well, you know, granted you might not be ready for a bug bounty program, but just throw up a VDP and you'll be fine. And I'm like, it's the same process. If you're not ready for a bug bounty program, like to pay the cash reward at the end, that's just the cash part. It has nothing to do with your readiness or your maturity and your ability to handle those vulnerability reports in the first place. And they've also muddled, bug bounty platforms in particular have muddied the pen tests where you should be, signing a non-disclosure agreement and keeping those findings under wraps, possibly forever, um, even if they're not fixed, right? With the VDP and bug bounty programs, where they're saying, well, especially with the bug bounty, if we pay you, you should just keep it quiet forever. Well, that wasn't actually that's not in the best interest of the public. And a lot of programs are run that way, but honestly, it shouldn't be. And the first Microsoft bug bounty program, that I created had no non-disclosure agreement. It just said, "Please keep it quiet until we fix it," but that was the same unspoken agreement that was always in place, when the vuln disclosure didn't involve cat. So, anyway, that's the difference between the 2 of them, and if you're not ready for a bug bounty, sorry, but you're not ready for a VDP either.
Fair, and I think the takeaway from your last, thought on this, if I heard correctly, was the disclosure part is necessary in a vulnerability disclosure program. Um, why?
Well, yeah, I often like to say the disclosure and vulnerability disclosure stands for disclosure, right? Because a lot of organizations think, okay, well, we fixed the bug, but we still don't want to talk about it or anybody to talk about it. And that is that is definitely counter to public safety. The whole reason and the actual origin story of vuln disclosure programs in the first place was it wasn't vendors who invented them. It was hackers. It was us trying to say to vendors, "We come in peace, but we're gonna make sure that the public is aware that they are in danger of this bug. And, we'd like you to fix it before we let everybody know, but how will people know that of what their risk is unless they understand the exact nature of the vulnerability, what could happen if it's exploited, and that will hopefully, encourage them to apply whatever patch you vendor, supply." So the disclosure part of vulnerability disclosure is absolutely necessary. It's also something that helped train up that next generation of hackers like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I hear that, and that has resonated. We've done an episode on patch differentials and patch bypassing, and that was the same comment, from the research on that episode. We're running out of time, so I want to change gears just for maybe one final tangent here. We are taping this basically on the eve of potentially CVE dying and then coming back, and maybe on a 12-month or less, extension to the MITRE contract. I saw recently that you posted, I'm gonna try and read this. I don't have the exact, piece up, but it should be pretty close. These are your words, I believe, right? "We need an authoritative plan with a true mandate if a transition out of MITRE," which is the group that maintains the CD program, "will work well." Got that, I completely agree with you. It makes no sense to drop on the world, like, you've got 24 hours to reconfigure an entire community. The second part is interesting. I'd love your thoughts on this. Your comment was, "Otherwise, we'll have for-profit companies, including those funding, the nonprofit foundations, competing with other governments, fracturing the space, vying to fill the void." Um, so it sounds like in your mind that the CVE entity, and I guess all the derivative programs are, in your view, inherently governmental and therefore should be run by some kind of government piece. What is the danger in either a for-profit company or a nonprofit, which would be funded by a bunch of for-profits, I guess, entering this space to try and fill the void if government funding and/or, management, for lack of a better word, can't actually get the job done?
Well, the United States invented the internet. We know that, right? It was a DARPA project. Um, and we used to be in charge of, namespace, right? And we had to hand that off to a separate entity outside of our government. And we managed that transition. Why can't we do the same thing here? If it is going to leave the government and go, let's say, to a nonprofit, that's fine as long as the nonprofit is transparent, like who is backing that nonprofit. And as long as there's an orderly transition. I mean, we literally handed off, the naming authority to ICANN, right? That was something that used to be an NTIA under the Commerce Department. NTIA managed, you know, thing that the US government did for the entire world, and we transitioned it off. So, I think that's the main thing, and I don't think anybody listening to your podcast doesn't know what a CVE is, but I can tell you from experience of having lived in a world before CVEs, you would have to spend so much time trying to analyze whether a bug in 2 different pieces of malware were the same or not, or if it was something else or a variant or something. So just if they were tagged with CVE numbers, then you knew, like, yep, these are both, these are both using the same bug. But there's so many other uses of universal identifiers. We've been talking about vulnerable disclosure a lot. CVE is mentioned in the international standards I co-authored on vulnerability disclosure and handling processes. Why? Because it's a universal unique identifier. We need a universal unique identifier system, no matter who's managing it. And the concern that I had really was that this seemed like a predictable end to a contract. Why hadn't we figured out an orderly transition? We now have an 11-month reprieve. Why don't we do that now, so that in case the contract isn't renewed and funded again in 11 months, we're not all sitting here going, no authoritative CVEs coming from any, source that didn't already reserve a bunch of numbers. It seems like it's a bad plan for internet continuity.
Well, that's a bleak way of ending our show. Last call. Anything else you would want the audience to know that you haven't had a chance to elaborate on today?
Yeah, I mean, something else that I stuck my neck out for Chris Krebs and Sentinel-1 last week in a blog post on my official company blog. As far as I know, we're still the only company that has come out in support of Chris Krebs and Sentinel-1, and your listeners know, Chris Krebs decided to step down from Sentinel-1. I'm sure Sentinel-1 is still having to cooperate with whatever investigations are going on. But at least he took the hard hit and the hard road of stepping out on his own. But something I just want to mention here is that it's not safe for any of us who serve, in advisory roles or serve actually working for the federal government if this stands. And that is something that I hope that other companies, not just individuals, but companies come out and take a stand against because it shouldn't just be my company. It should be all of our companies. And we should absolutely be able to hire former government employees who we need their experiences that they got from seeing threats at the government level and the nation state level. We need them to cross over into private industry. And we similarly need experts from the cybersecurity community to cross over and want to work directly for the federal government. So this bidirectional exchange needs to be safe and protected and nonpartisan. So I am hoping that other companies, not just individuals, will come forward and throw their support behind Chris Krebs.
That's a thank you. Now I don't feel as doom and gloom. I think now on a positive end note. Um, Katie, where can people go to find out more about you, your work, or anything you mentioned today?
Our company is lutasecurity.com. And, you can definitely find me on Blue Sky and also on Twitter and LinkedIn. But I am trying to do more on Blue Sky.
Rock on. Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate this. Like, really, really appreciate your taking your time today. Thanks, and cheers.
Cheers.